I just want to say a few words about this document from Dante, the poet of the Divine Comedy, Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso. He also wrote this about politics. This is a sort of very interesting view into how a medieval person of the Middle Ages in Europe, thought about political issues, and I think it's very, very much worth reading. It might be a little odd the way that he goes about it, but it's fully coherent, even if some of the things that he says seem really wild. I mean, one of the things he's saying is that there should be a world emperor and one world government, which may seem an outlandish thing to say, but it's the conclusion of an argument. And I guess whenever we're looking at, somebody trying to prove a point, what we need to do is look at the argument. And if we think that the conclusion is crazy, which it very well may be, you have to look in the argument for where it went wrong. You can't just say it's crazy. Well, what's wrong with the argument, the premises, the reasoning? Well, his way of going about things is kind of typically classical. I mean, it's very Aristotelian, really based upon the way that Aristotle thought about things and the way Aristotle went about things. I mean, we've read Aristotle, very little part of Aristotle, but if you want to get a sense of how important Aristotle was during Dante's period, which is, quite a 2,000 years really after Aristotle, but his reputation and his influence was so much that here in section 3, Aristotle is simply referred to as the philosopher. Right? That's Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics. Something that various writers did at the time. Aristotle was so important, they just called him the philosopher. Well, what is Dante trying to do here? Well, he's really following out an argument about what sort of government we need and why. The first thing that he does is to really identify what he considers to be the proper work, the proper function, which he describes here in section 3 of human beings in general. That is, the idea of the proper function, which is an Aristotelian concept, is that built into any living thing is something that it was meant to do, something that characterizes it as the kind of unique being it is. And for Dante, it's clear what that function is, what that proper or that activity proper to human beings is, and it's intellectual activity. That's what separates us from the animals, is our capacity to reason. But he specifies that a little bit. He says that our proper function, our proper activity is intellectual growth. That's what he says here in section 3. And that's really not only to differentiate us from the animals who are not capable of intellectual activity, but from higher beings like angels. It's intellectual growth. It's because angels don't grow intellectually; they're perfect already, right? It's human beings who can grow, use their reason, and grow their reason and grow their knowledge, so that he identifies what we are meant to do, not just as individuals, but certainly as individuals, but also as a species, is to reach some kind of knowledge of truth. Right? That's what we're here for. Purpose of human beings is not to reproduce or something like that. All animals do that. Purpose of human beings is not just to continue their existence. All things do that. Purpose of human beings is to achieve intellectual growth, to get closer to truth, to become more and more knowledgeable, to understand more and more themselves and the world. And so it all really starts from there. It all really starts from this identification of human nature, what's most essential about it, being intellectual growth. And also, what's right here, the idea that no human being can do it alone. That is, that the search for knowledge and understanding is a group activity. It's a species-wide activity. Where he says, therefore, it is clear that man's basic capacity, being that function that they were supposed to, by nature, engage in, is to have a potentiality or power for being intellectual. And since this power cannot be completely actualized in a single man or in any of the particular communities of men above mentioned, there must be a multitude in mankind through whom this whole power can be actualized. And that means that the human species, the human race in general, is supposed to achieve knowledge of truth. I mean, there's something very compelling about the idea. And imagine what we consider to be science. It's not the activity of one person. There are geniuses who stand out in the history of science: Newton, Galileo, Kepler, Copernicus, Darwin, Einstein. The list goes on. But that's a group activity of the whole species. So that is what we're meant to do: is to achieve intellectual growth, to get closer and closer to the truth of all things. And it all follows from that, because then the question is, how do we do that? And the answer to that is by having peace. That is, that human beings must have peace in order to have the time and the quiet to engage in intellectual growth. And there is something to that, I think. That is, although in times of war there may be great technological innovations like the atomic bomb, atomic energy, or radar, or synthesizing nitrates, whatever it is that happened. But basic, Dante's not talking about that. He's talking about basic science, the kind of basic progress in fundamental science that makes possible those technological innovations, and they don't happen unless there's peace. Universities to instill learning, people who have, they're not worried about their next meal. They're worried about, the structure of the atom, or the idea of natural selection. So people like Darwin and Newton and Einstein and Galileo had to have time and peace and education to do that. So the next step here is to say, okay, how do we reach our end? If our end is intellectual growth, how do we reach it? We reach it through having peace. And then the question is, of course, then how do we achieve peace? And that's where he makes his argument for a world government with a world emperor, right? Which is a kind of an outlandish thing to say, that there should be a world government and one person at the top of it, which is a very contentious thing to say. But that's his claim about what needs to be in place to achieve the kind of peace that he believes we need in order to reach our end, our proper end in activity, which is intellectual growth.